We are here with the 2010 Missouri Valley Conference Women's Soccer Coach of the Year, Creighton's Bruce Erickson. Bruce, you're starting practice later today. Tell us kind of what this first week or two of training does, how you go about it to get ready for the season.
Well, I think, things are a little bit different for us this year. We've got 21 players, and we have the longest preseason we've ever had. So we're going to have roughly, I think it's close to 17 days of training, of practice, before we actually play our first official game. So our philosophy, I think, for this preseason is primarily going to be, a marathon, not a race mentality. We want to get players back to fitness. That's easier to do when you're playing games. So we've got, a blue and white scrimmage and an exhibition with UNO, so it'll be equal parts that and equal parts an emphasis in training. We've got very few players to integrate into our team. Madeline and Stephanie are only freshmen, and then Kelsey comes in as a highly touted transfer, but she'll have to sit out a year. So we don't have a lot to integrate in the team. We got a lot of good players returning. It's just can we keep everybody healthy with a little bit less on our roster?
With all those kids back, 9 starters, 16 juniors and seniors who have been around the program, does that help you? As opposed to trying to learn everybody's names and, hey, when we're going to do this drill, this is how we set it up. You can kind of go and you're almost ahead because you've had a spring season to work with these kids already, and you've been through a full season with almost all these kids.
Yeah, I think I look at it two ways. One is, I think, just to kind of go down the road you were talking about. It helps us be a lot more efficient. Going over set pieces and our formation and things of that nature. When you've got that many players returning, it becomes just sort of reacquainting them with things that we did in the spring and the things that we did in the fall. Unfortunately for us, I think one of the 2 players that we lost happened to be sort of whatever term you want to use, a quarterback, point guard of our team in the back, in Claire Zock. So probably one of the best leaders we've ever had, but also probably one of the more overachieving players we had. I mean, Claire was a good player, but she made herself a great player for us and a tough one to replace. So while we've got that continuity in place, that will help. But we're still, we had to do that in the spring. We're still searching to make sure we've got the right group, the right player or players that can step in and replace a couple of the players that have departed.
Emily Arbel was a big playmaker for you the last couple of years, but you've got 4 of the top 5 scorers in the Missouri Valley Conference. Were on your team last year. All of them are back. Your offense was one of the nation's best last year. What can we expect for an encore?
I think, a lot's going to hinge on Brittany. She led us in scoring, had a great year, was the player of the year in our league. And I think she's going to have a good year. Will she have as good of a year? It's hard to tell, when you're coming back from an injury and you're coming back, a lot of things went our way. But I think she'll have, I think we could be better. I think, I would look at a couple players in particular, sort of in this order. I think Zuniga, Beth Files, and Lauren Signorelli. I think those 3 in particular, Brittany obviously included in that, but those 3 I think I expect to have better years. I think Zuniga, this could be her breakout year in terms of scoring. And she's gotten better every year she's been with us. But she's as fit as I've seen. She's been one of our best players in the spring. And I think, I think we could be better in that regard. I really do.
In the offseason, you promoted Yvonne Valentin, had been a volunteer assistant for you for a long time. You've promoted her to a full-time role as an assistant coach. She was a great defender when she played here. How does she help solidify your coaching staff? As somebody that's familiar with what you've done, she's a former player and still pretty fit herself.
Well, I think I'd love to still have her playing. That would be where I would use her probably the most. But I think we're going to use her knowledge and her ability to connect with the players back there. We're new in the center of the back, and that's a position she had a great deal of experience playing here. And so, we're going to lean on her a lot. Primarily she'll be working with sort of our team defending, which will include, our back 4 and we've got some veterans back there with Macy, with Kelly Connolly, Cat Wright has played a lot back there. Kitty Murphy's returning. But, you know, we could be young in the middle. And that's where I think she'll make her presence felt with Shauna, who's a sophomore, and Madeline Buckner, a freshman coming in, probably projected to jump right in the lineup. You know, that's so we're bookended by seniors, but we're young in the middle there and in important positions, and she's going to be counted on to sort of help that transition there.
It's hard to believe that Morrison Stadium, this is now going to be the 9th year. You've led the Valley in attendance every year. It's hosted the Valley Championship 5 of the last 6 falls. Mm-hmm. Is it still something that's a big advantage when it comes to recruiting? That, hey, you can sell it from a fan perspective. Hey, the U.S. Women's National Team has played here. How does the stadium play into things as you try to recruit student athletes?
It certainly is in terms of recruiting. I think there's always 4 or 5 benchmarks or things that when you're recruiting a kid you want to sort of fall in place. You want your facilities, you want your academic reputation, you want the quality of your team and players and staff. But when you talk specifically about facilities, that's been our anchor. Obviously those other things fall in hand. Great academics, we've built up the reputation of our team, but it's still the stadium still has the wall power and the wow factor for that matter, and so that's helped us, and we got a great group of players coming in the future, and I think the stadium had a big part to do with that, among other things. And I don't know that it's necessarily a home field advantage. I think the men would probably agree with that it's not as much of a factor as it was maybe in the early stages. I think there's more artificial surfaces around now that teams are able to play on and get used to. There's 3 others in our league, with Drake, with Indiana State, with Missouri State all playing on it. It's not as much of an advantage to us anymore. I think what is still probably a little bit of an advantage is our environment, with the crowd and students and that kind of stuff.
The last question, with all you've got returning from a team that was 15-4-2 a year ago, I would imagine probably going to be the preseason #1 team in the Valley. And it's really nothing new. You've been to the NCAA tournament 5 times since 2002, but do you think your kids are ready to handle those expectations, and do you think they welcome them as like, hey, let's try to prove how good we can be this season?
Well, I think you kind of hit on what our theme is going to be with our players, and that is, 2007. I think we made a little bit of a mistake. That was our 3rd championship in 4 years, I think, and we really felt like, hey, then the next step is automatically, hey, we want to get to the 2nd and 3rd round of the NCAA tournament, when I think the focus still should have remained, there's no at-large bids in our league. They're all automatic bids, and that still has to be sort of our pursuit, that we're not defending anything. We're, 2010's done, 2011 is new. We'll always have a target on our back. It might be a little bit bigger this year, but our mentality has to be that we're in pursuit of that conference championships, because then that determines what we do from there. If we don't get that, we're not going to the NCAA tournament. We're not, unless we go undefeated up until we get to the conference tournament, we're not going to get an at-large bid. So our #1 goal is win the league, win the conference tournament, get to the NCAA tournament, and that's where we hope we can take the program in the next logical step.
All right, thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.